In this video, we'll see how to make white bread loaf or sandwich bread with all the tips and tricks and details. Let's get started. Take 1 cup warm milk. Make sure that the milk is warm and not hot. Now add 3 teaspoons sugar. Give it a good stir. Now add 3.5 teaspoon dry yeast or active dry yeast. I'm using yeast from Angel brand. It's available on Amazon. You can check out link given in video's description box. Amazon link in video's description. Now you need to gently mix it. You don't need to actually dissolve it. Just 2 to 3 swirls of your spoon in the milk. That's it. And now cover it and let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes. This is called as activating the yeast or blooming of the yeast. So after 15 minutes or so, maybe 10 minutes if you're staying in warmer or hotter region, you can see the yeast has really bloomed well. If it doesn't happen, please do not use the yeast. Now in a bowl, take 3.5 cup all-purpose flour and add around 1 teaspoon salt. Mix well so that the salt is incorporated into the maida or all-purpose flour. Now add the yeast mixture in the center and then you need to start bringing everything together like you make your normal dough. You would also need some water in this process. So the total amount of water which I have used is half cup. The measuring cups and spoons which I use have 1 cup is equal to 240 ml. So half cup is 120 ml by volume. Okay, the dough would be sticky. Take it out on your counter or a big parat. The point is that you need to knead it. You need to just pull the dough and bring it together. Pull it like that for 10 to 15 minutes. I know this sounds like a task, but this is needed. If you have a stand mixer, you can use that. After 5 minutes or so, add 4 teaspoon butter. And again, continue with the stretching and kneading process. If towards the end of the 15 minutes you feel that the dough is sticking to your hand or the counter, take some oil, apply to your hand and to the dough and you would be able to easily pick the dough up. And yes, please apply some oil in your bowl as well before you drop in the dough. Now drop the dough in. Now cover this dough with a damp cloth. Damp means you should wet your cloth and then take out the excess water and use that to cover this dough. Let this sit on your kitchen counter till it doubles in size. It might take 1 or 2 hours depending on the temperature in your region. This is my bread tin or bread mold which I'm going to use. I'll tell you its dimension. So here it's 4 inch, 9 inch and 4 inch. It comes with a lid. If you want to use this lid while proving or while baking, you need to reduce the amount of flour, that is maida, from 3.5 to 3. If you have smaller sized mold, please reduce the amount of ingredients or make 2 bread loaves. It's been 2 hours and you can see how well this dough has risen. You need to deflate this dough and again knead for a minute or so. Sprinkle some maida if required. And you need to bring this dough together. Now roll this dough with a rolling pin or your balun and make sure that you roll it wide enough to fit in your mold. So it looks perfect now and it's time to now roll it. This rolling step is very important, so you would have noticed the store-bought bread. So if you look carefully or closely, you see concentric circles. And that look, that texture of the cross section of store-bought bread comes from this process. So make sure you roll this dough tight and you keep pinching after rolling it once so that there are no air bubbles inside. Otherwise you would end up getting big air bubbles when you cut your bread loaf and get a slice. So you might be able to see the other person on the other side. Jokes apart, you need to also seal the ends like this. And again pinch. Put this in your mold. Right now you see it looks very less, the amount of dough looks very less, but it would rise again. Press the dough, flatten it a bit so that it spreads really well inside this mold. Apply some oil on top so that the top doesn't dry out. And it's time for second proving. You need to again cover this with a cloth and let it prove for an hour. It might happen within 30 to 40 minutes as well, depending on the temperature in your region. So the dough should touch this cloth. So you can see it has come to the level of this mold. Now I'm applying some milk. Now next step is to preheat the oven. So meanwhile it would rise more. So I'm going to keep this aside and preheat my oven. So you need to preheat your OTG at 200 degrees Celsius for 10 minutes. You can see the dough has risen more and it is now out of the mold. I'm going to put it in my oven, which is now preheated. Bake this bread at 200 degrees Celsius for first 20 minutes and then lower the temperature to 180 degrees Celsius and then bake for 40 minutes or 30 to 40 minutes. So total 50 minutes for this bread mold. If you're using smaller bread mold, you would need less time. Be patient, otherwise your bread would be raw inside. So this looks done. I've taken it out. So to check, you can just knock the bread, and if you hear hollow sound, that means your bread is done throughout, I mean inside out. It's not raw. Next step is to apply some oil or butter. I'm using oil. You can also use melted butter. And it's very important that you demold, that is, you take this bread out of the mold after 10 to 15 minutes. If you let this bread sit inside the mold, the base or the sides would become soggy. So make sure you demold after 10 to 15 minutes. Then wrap this bread loaf in a cotton cloth and let it cool down completely. The bread has cooled down, and after it cools down, you would notice that the sides would become soft. Even the top would become soft. And this loaf is ready to be cut into slices. But before I do that, I will tell you the weight of this bread loaf which we have made with 3.5 cup maida. So you can see it's 779 gram by weight. It's important that you cut your bread using a serrated knife. So here I've got a bread knife. You can see it's serrated. If in case you do not have it, you can use a regular knife like this. So you can see it is also serrated. Make sure you move your knife back and forth and do not press on the bread loaf like you do on a cake, because the texture of cake is different. You wouldn't be able to do the same with a bread loaf. So be patient and use back and forth motion of your knife, and that way only you need to slice this, because this loaf is very soft and elastic. So this is the top part of this bread, that is the heel of the bread. Even it looks like store-bought ones. And here's a closer look of the bread for you. Though there are some air bubbles, not very big because we had pinched the dough really well. Now you can eat this bread the way you want, with jam, butter, with pav bhaji, in sandwiches, or just like that, toasted bread with some butter. Give this recipe a try and enjoy!